encouraged to loot were in no way discouraged from committing the same excesses as the Russians and the French. Today, the verb liberate has become an army colloquialism for stealing. Oh my goodness. This is so hard to read. Okay. She goes on to write, since every army contains a percentage of gangster and criminal elements, there is always some looting in every occupied enemy country and a certain amount of brutal mishandling of the civilian population. The instructions given by Washington to the United States Army positively encouraged the licentious and brutal minority and penalized the decent, law-abiding, and humane majority. It is to the credit of the American people that in spite of the Roosevelt-Montague directives put into operation by General Eisenhower without protest, large numbers of American soldiers insisted on behaving like Christian gentlemen. Many succored the hungry, and defenseless Germans in spite of the regulations against it. Others were impelled by the impulse, which in all ages has broken the barriers between the conquerors and the conquered. Americans in the occupation forces might enjoy the status of sons of heaven, but like the angels, they looked upon the daughters of earth and saw that they were fair. It was impossible to prevent GIs who were far from home and sick of war to carry the demands of vengeance to the extent of rejecting associations with ill-fed but neat German women or refusing candy to starving German children. Neither army regulations nor the propaganda of hatred in the American press could prevent American soldiers from liking and associating with German women, who, although they were driven by hunger to become prostitutes, preserved a certain innate decency, and by responding to kindness with affection and loyalty, often won the love of an American boy who started out only to enjoy the pleasures which war affords to the victors. One moment, please. You are listening to a reading of The High Cost of Vengeance by Freda-Utley. Because of the natural kindness of the Americans, this call of human nature, and the qualities of the German women, the inhumane and unrealistic directives given by Washington to the United States occupation forces were from the beginning more honored in the breach than in an observance. The futility of telling Americans to act like Nazis, communists, or robots led at the early stage to the cancellation of the non-fraternization decrees. Meanwhile, the utter absurdity of the Montague Plan and the high cost of vengeance was becoming obvious in America. Far from realizing surpluses, Western Germany had to be supplied with American foods to prevent disease and unrest dangerous to the occupation forces. Americans had not been sufficiently indoctrinated with totalitarian concepts of collective punishment to be inflicted on the innocent and guilty alike to enable them to condemn millions of people to death by starvation, even if this policy had not involved risk to the occupation forces. Humanitarian sentiment was reinforced by the dangers to which American soldiers were exposed. Germs disregard racial barriers, or those dividing good and bad nations, and it was also realized that starving people might prefer a quick death by attacking their conquerors to a slow, lingering one. So the American taxpayer was called upon to provide just enough food to keep the Germans alive and submissive, and to prevent epidemics. Gradually also, the influence of the so-called liberals and New Deal advocates of the theory that we should also love communists and hate all Germans declined. The original pattern of the United States occupation had been set at a time when propaganda had convinced a large number of Americans that Soviet an example of a new and better democratic way of life, and had induced the majority of Americans to believe that Stalin could be trusted to honor his commitments. After the Soviet government made it increasingly obvious that it was irrevocably hostile to the Western democracies and had no more intentions of observing its treaties with us than those it had formerly signed with its European neighbors, the most loving friends of the Soviet Union were compelled to think again. Those who were not communists were forced to admit that the assumptions on which the United States policy had been based since 1941 might considerably be false. As the menace of the Soviet aggression grew, the assumption that the Germans were the root of all evil crumbled. As it became more and more apparent that the Soviet Union menaced the whole world, it became clear that what was left of Europe must be defended against Russia, even at the cost of forgiving the German people for their error in following Nazi leadership and admitting them into the community of free Western nations. Understanding of the terrible present danger which communism constitutes to freedom everywhere in the world, combined with the American taxpayers' realization of the cost of vengeance, combined to modify our German policy. The Marshall Plan for the reconstruction of Europe, which included Germany as the recipient of the American ECA assistance, took the place of the Montague Plan for keeping Germany in chains and Europe in rags. The need for the complete repudiation of the totalitarian concepts which originally inspired our occupation policy is not, however, recognized even today. As soon as I arrived in Germany in August 1948, I realized that the assumption at home that the Marshall Plan had completely superseded the Montague Plan is a delusion. United States policy had changed, and compared to the first years of the occupation, had become humane and intelligent. But the basic pattern remained the same. The adherents of the Montague Plan, although they no longer directed the United States occupation policies, still influenced it and could be found occupying important positions in military government. The communists and their sympathizers were no longer permitted to hold leading positions in Germany, but they were still able to work through so-called liberals who had been persuaded that advocacy of a humane and constructive policy in Germany is a sign of reactionary sympathies. Reactionary sympathies. You hear that phrase today. Warning. Communist influence has been reinforced by French intransigence and the British desire to eliminate German competition. Let me try this sentence again. Warning. Communist influence has been reinforced by French intransigence and the British desire to eliminate German competition in markets of the world. This dismantlement and other measures which debilitate Germany, weaken Europe, place ever-increasing burdens on America, and pave the way for a communist conquest of the world, are still being implemented. 1949, by the way. This book does not attempt to deal with all aspects of the common problem, of the German problem. It aims only to show that American people, the cost of vengeance, now and in the future. That cost cannot be appraised only in economic terms. The moral, political, and military consequences of denying to the Germans not only liberty, but also the right to earn a living and the right of self-defense may lead to the destruction of the Western civilization, unless America is made aware in time the need to implement in Europe the principles which make her great. Now that's the end of chapter 1. I want you to think of one country right now. I want you to think of Palestine, of how she's been denied land, of economic policy. She's denied in every way that the Germans have been denied. And we're supporting Israel in this endeavor. We must think of common decency, our moral compass, and not be Israel's prostitute. We can honor Israel for their real needs, but not be their puppet, not be their prostitute. Do not allow Israel to wipe themselves off inside us for us to support their imperialism over Palestine. Palestine deserves a voice. Those are just my thoughts, such as they are. That's been the reading today. I've spent over an hour reading that. I'm going to maybe later today read chapter 2. I can't wait to get to chapter 7, where it talks about our crimes of humanity. Just in reading what I read today, I can only imagine what else is there. What else did General Eisenhower condone? What did he say was okay? I'm in shock. I wonder what else is going to come over the wire. Yeah. Who's going to knock on my door? I'm feeling a little bit nauseous, to be honest. We might get out some old films. But please go to freda-utley.com. Learn about her, especially to my family. She is related to us. If you came from the Virginia Utleys, Goochland Utleys, if you came from them, then very possible. I know my branch is related to her. And if you're related to our branches from Goochland, Virginia, then you are related to her as well. So we do try to stay in touch. So I want to end with this song. It's by Emil Sand, who is a UK artist. I love my tea and I love my Emil Sand. And it's called Abide With Me. I thank you for going the distance and listening. And I really like this song. It's called Abide With Me. Let's stay together. We are family. Let's keep our moral compass together. And let's lift people up, not press them down. And do something more than sit on your couch. Whether it be your church or your local community group, go out there and do something. Don't just sit there. Speak up, make them hear you, and take action. Thank you for listening. And at the end of the song, the podcast will be concluded.